Aimee Ng, curator at the Frick Collection in New York, and welcome to another episode of Cocktails with a Curator. Before diving into the episode, I want to thank you for your support of the Frick, and many of you may have noticed that there's a donate button now next to this video. Every contribution made to the Frick makes it possible for us to continue doing what we're doing, and as you can probably see in our communications with you, any contribution made to the Frick's annual fund through the end of the year, through December 31st, will be matched. So will be doubled. That is through the end of the year. Many of you have written to us that Xavier and I have been keeping you company at your homes throughout this difficult year. And I want you to know that it's a privilege for us to be able to reach you where you are in the world. Thank you for welcoming us into your homes, and thank you for your support of the Frick. Now, for today's episode, we are heading into the home of a 17th century Dutch story. This painting, Vermeer's so-called Mistress and Maid, may have been, like so many of Vermeer's paintings, painted in the second floor studio of the artist's home in Delft. Earlier in the series, sometime in the summer, I spoke about one of the other paintings by Vermeer in the Frick's collection, the so-called Officer and Laughing Girl. And for that episode, I bought a bottle of Genever, the traditional Dutch liquor, which was both the precursor to British gin and the source of the term Dutch courage. For this episode, I am dipping in again to that bottle of Genever for today's cocktail, which is a Genever Brûlée, a perfect concoction to warm one up on a cold December evening. And the recipe for this and the suggested mocktail is below and on the Frick's website, like all of our cocktail recipes, frick.org. Cheers. So I won't rehearse the biographical details of Johannes Vermeer, not only because I did so in that earlier episode, but also because relatively little is known about his biography. And for this reason, Vermeer has been called the Sphinx of Delft, this sort of elusive life. He seems to have spent his entire life in Delft, though today he's one of the most famous artists of the early modern period in Europe. It seems that during his life, he did struggle, and he died at the age of 43, nearly bankrupt, apparently suffering great stress from these financial troubles. Now, he's best known for scenes like this, interior scenes of everyday life with remarkable attention paid to the details of objects, the fall of light on figures, on surfaces. And for this painting, traditionally titled Mistress and Maid, just a quick word, obviously, about the title. Mistress, in this case, obviously refers to the lady of the household. Here, the seated woman in a fur-lined yellow jacket and dress with pearls. Her husband historically would have been referred to as the master of the household. And the maid, obviously, would be the woman working in service to the household. And that would be here, the woman standing in brown and a blue skirt. And here she's passing the letter to the seated lady. The Mistress and Maid theme was a popular one in Dutch 17th century genre painting. And Vermeer, of course, was not the only artist of his time who is engaged in this subject. And I'll just show you two sort of randomly chosen examples by one of his contemporaries, Gabriel Metsu, of, again, variations on this theme. And Vermeer himself painted two other versions or scenes on this topic, this one in the National Gallery of Ireland, the maid is sort of waiting for the letter to be written, and this one in the Rijksmuseum. They're full of intrigue, quiet drama, and mystery. Basically, these paintings engage the viewers of them to wonder, what's in the letter? Who's it from? Who's she writing to? Does this lady have a lover? What is the maid's role in each one of these? So each one of these paintings tells a slightly different story, but variations of that theme. And the Frick's Mistress and Maid painting inspired a recent book in the Frick's diptych series, co-authored by my friend and former colleague at the Frick, Margaret Iacono, and the Academy Award-winning director, producer, and screenwriter, James Ivory. Both texts in this small, delightful book bring new insights into the painting and to the theme of the Mistress and Maid genre in 17th century Dutch art. So if you want more information, please do look that up. It's available on the Frick website and elsewhere. So it's not often that a very famous work of art made hundreds of years ago can offer new discoveries today. But that's exactly what happened with this painting at the Frick. First, let's take a closer look. Of the 34 unanimously accepted paintings by Vermeer known today, there are 3 in the Frick's collection. And the Mistress and Maid, out of these 3, is somewhat unusual. As you can see from this photograph, which was taken in 2013 when the Frick's 3 Vermeer paintings were shown together for a limited time in celebration of the exhibition at the Frick of the treasures from the Mauritshuis, including the famous girl with the pearl earring. Mistress and Maid is much larger than the other 2 Vermeer paintings at the Frick, and generally Vermeer paintings at large. It is also somewhat, for this reason, the sort of larger scale of it, it's been suggested that the Mistress and Maid painting was not made for the open market, but was specifically commissioned to be installed in a particular place, a patron's mantelpiece or something like that. The other somewhat usual quality about the painting is that the background is relatively flat and dark, unlike the other 2. Yes, small scale focused paintings like Girl with a Pearl Earring sort of have this dark background that can focus all of the attention onto her face. And it's a very special quality of this painting, I think, that does that. But in other domestic scenes by Vermeer, you get the sense of maps and paintings and curtains and tapestries really enriching the domestic scene around. And in Love Letter, this painting at the Rijksmuseum on the right, Vermeer sets up the compositions of the viewer is almost peering into another room, one decorated with many things on the wall, giving a sense of the viewer having happened upon or maybe spied upon the drama around the letter. Unlike, of course, the painting at the Frick, which seems to be much more like set on a stage, foregrounded drama. And although the paintings are very different in scale, so the Frick painting is much larger than the Rijksmuseum picture. If we zoom in a little bit to the drama that's happening in the Rijksmuseum picture, it becomes clear that these are the same figures, or at least elements of their costumes are very similar. Both of the women are wearing, the seated women are wearing yellow fur-lined jackets and dresses, pearl earring, pearl necklace, and then the standing maids are in brown tops and blue dresses, blue skirts. But of course, very, very different effects. As I said, if there's a sense of voyeurism in the Rijksmuseum painting on the right, in the Frick picture, because of this dark background, the figures and dramas are highlighted more theatrically as if presented on a stage. And looking closely at the Frick's Mistress and Maid picture, one gets a sense of the luxury of the scene. Not just the mistress's elegant clothing, but her massive hanging pearl earring, probably harvested in the Gulf of Mannar between India and Sri Lanka. Like in other paintings by Vermeer, so big, so enormously expensive that it's been suggested that it must be a fake, that it must be made of polished glass, polished silver or tin, or made of glass, perhaps exaggerated by the artist in paint. The objects on the table include a glass and silver writing set, and she's just put down her pen in the middle of writing. And to the left, a veneered box, possibly holding writing materials or letters. It's been suggested that that box comes from Goa, that it was made in Goa, the Portuguese colony at the time. And the rumpled blue tablecloth, of course, is itself an object of value. So looking closely at the painting, the woman's hand to her chin, a gesture that communicates concern, surprise. What has the maid said? What's in the letter she's passing? What has she said that has stopped her in her tracks? Some have suggested that the painting has an appearance of unfinished, sort of a lack of detail in surfaces like that hand to her chin, the ringlets in her hair, but they are not unfinished. Examination has shown that these are elements of thinly applied paints, in line with Vermeer's later technique, sort of a gentle layering of paints that over the course of centuries have become more and more translucent, and in some case even altered color. And the evolution of paint over time has also affected this sort of mysterious background. Again, looking just at the background, if you spend some time sort of exploring that background, you might notice that it's not actually a flat black background. But there are some ghostly lines that seem to suggest a curtain pulled toward the right. And these clues led to an incredible discovery led by Margaret Iacono at the Frick and conservators at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, especially Dorothy Mann in the Department of Paintings Conservation and colleagues in the Department of Scientific Research at the Met, as well as colleagues at the Dorner Institute in Munich. You can see that it often takes a village, and so many colleagues have worked together in order to bring these mysteries and discoveries to light. It has been determined that the dark background was, in fact, applied by Vermeer. It was suggested maybe this has been put on by somebody later, but no, it was, in fact, by Vermeer. But it was originally much greener in tone, with the drawn curtains to the right, these sort of undulating wrinkles. And the tablecloth, too, has transformed in a similar way. A sort of degraded copper-containing pigment has changed it from a once appearing green and to now looking blue. And intriguingly, a green tablecloth was included in the list of Vermeer's possessions at the end of his life. But that's not all. The curtain, in effect, was a plan B. It was painted over a discarded first idea. So when the conservators examined the painting using infrared reflectography, they discovered a set of figures painted in the background. So the IRR is on the left here. Not fully articulated, not totally detailed, but certainly there, at least 4 figures. Vermeer had originally planned a figural background, perhaps a tapestry hanging behind the figures, which would be in line with other paintings, for example, like this one in the National Gallery of Ireland, where there is a sort of figural composition behind. But for some reason, he abandoned that idea. And he painted a curtain over it, changing entirely the composition, focusing the drama on the figures and the power of that letter to cause that woman to drop that pen and make this gesture of surprise. And if you'd like to learn more about these discoveries and especially the technical information, you can, of course, take a look at the book, or there's a link to an article about that technical examination and those results below in the pinned comment. One of the earliest and one of the most significant old master paintings that Henry Clay Frick acquired for his collection was the very first Vermeer painting he purchased in 1901. That's to the very left, Girl Interrupted at Her Music. Officer and Laughing Girl in the center came into his collection 10 years later in 1911. The Mistress and Maid holds a special place in the Frick's collection. This was the last Vermeer painting he acquired, and it was also the very last object he brought into his collection in 1919. And he had already, 4 years early in 1915, when he moved into the house, he determined that he would open his home as a public museum after his death and after the death of his wife. He died months after acquiring the Mistress and Maid painting, and it's sort of a fitting end, a sort of coda to Frick's own collecting practice. But at the same time, the Mistress and Maid marks the beginning of another story. After Frick's death in 1919, a board of trustees of the Frick collection was appointed the very following year. And after the death of Frick's widow, Adelaide Frick, in 1931, the Frick home was converted into a public museum, opening its doors to public visitors for the first time in 1935. And we are celebrating right now the 85th anniversary of the opening of the Frick collection. And over the last 85 years, since 1920 and since the museum opened, the museum's collection has grown. The museum itself has changed in many ways, has continued to evolve. And we cannot wait to welcome you to the Frick's temporary home at Frick Madison early next year. There, visitors will be able to sit in a single room, stand in a single room, and be surrounded by the Frick's 3 Vermeers, perhaps making discoveries or rediscoveries of their own. Thank you for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Cheers.